A very quick summary that we usually try to do of what's going on with low carbon emissions energy in both electricity and fuels. That number of 800,000 has stayed basically flat over the last 3-4 years that we've done this study. But what you have seen is a very significant trend change in terms of the technologies that are growing and the technologies that are declining. And so you've seen probably the most steady growth has come in low emissions natural gas, which jumped by 7% last year, now up over 69,000. A majority of natural gas generation plants are using this high technology or low emissions technology. And in most of the other low emissions generation technologies, except for solar, you've continued to see pretty steady growth. And then, of course, in nuclear, you've seen this flattening out and slight declines as some of the plants have come under pressure. We do like to take a quick look at the construction industry because it's important to note how significant construction is to our overall energy workforce. In energy, generally, almost 1.9 million construction jobs. That's 26% of all construction jobs in the country are focused on energy, and a little higher than that of all energy jobs generally. You see 1.3 million of those are in energy efficiency, another 480,000 in the basic infrastructure, and another 300,000 are in manufacturing. So in the electric power generation and fuels, there are something like 320,000 manufacturing jobs spread across a number of these fields. Construction firms, again, I can't repeat this enough, reporting this very high difficulty in the entire survey. So it is both a challenge and, of course, if we solve it, it's a great opportunity. Just to give you the high view on hiring difficulties, as I mentioned, just under 77% of all surveyed employers reported difficulty hiring qualified workers in the last year. On average, 29% reported it was very difficult. So contrast that to the 52 in energy efficiency construction. Then we have listed just a few of the technologies and occupations with the highest difficulties and some of the highest demand occupations in energy efficiency construction. But there's an awful lot of detail on all of these issues spread across different technologies and geographies in the report. Then the overall hiring, projected hiring rates. I mentioned those as I went through the chapters, so I'm not going to repeat those. But an awful lot of jobs at stake if we're able to produce the kind of training systems to allow this kind of expansion of the workforce to take place. Finally, on workforce demographics, we found that many of these sectors are now racially more diverse than the workforce as a whole, which is at 22%. And you can see the percentage variation around these 5 different sectors. For Latino or Hispanic, from 10 to 19%, Black or African American from 5 to 9%, and then those who identify 2 or more races are from 7 to 10% in these 5 areas compared to 2% in census data overall. Of all of these sectors, electric power generation is the most diverse, with 31% of the workforce people of color. Women are not doing as equitably in these sectors, varying from 23 to 32% compared to a workforce of 47%. Again, electric power generation is the most diverse. These sectors do very well with veterans hiring, ranging from 9 to 11% compared to 6% nationally. And finally, unionization rates are generally higher than the national rate of 6.5% in the private sector, except in fuels, which is at 3%. They range up to 16% in electric power generation and in transmission, distribution, and storage. I want to give you just a very brief look before stepping down on one of the areas that we're getting into more deeply. Energy Jobs Wage Data Project, we call it. Our goal is to create a job quality index for jobs in the energy and energy efficiency sectors as a way of looking at how do we evaluate that aspect of what's going on during this period of rapid technological change. Our problem is that jobs in these different technologies rarely require completely unique skills and often build upon existing skill sets, but may require specialized training and qualifications. So the index components are listed above, of course, wages and benefits and safety, but we also want to look at this issue of career advancement and what are the certification opportunities, premiums, what are the barriers to entry to jobs, and a variety of other factors. Here's just a sneak peek at some of the data that we did publish in this report and some of the crosscuts so that you can start seeing the different average entry-level wages across nuclear, natural gas, petroleum, coal. I guess it shouldn't be a complete surprise to anyone that among the fossil fuels, coal, natural gas, and petroleum, that the average median level wage was highest in the coal industry, and that I think just flags a challenge is what happens when one technology starts to decline and others start to rise. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Phil Jordan, our valued partner at VW Research, who we worked with for 2 years at DOE producing this report, and now have worked with for 2 years following. Phil.
Thanks very much, Dave. Thank you for your remarks and your leadership in this initiative and your mentorship and your friendship. I also just like to very quickly recognize Jeanette Pablo and David Ellis and Sandy Fazeli, who ran the structure of our weekly meetings, and also Ryan Young, our research manager, who poured his heart and soul and, most importantly, his brain into this project. So thanks, Ryan, for all your work on this. And of course to David Terry and Secretary Moniz for your leadership and support in making sure that this important work continues. So thank you for that. I'm going to be quite brief to help with the transition from the data presentation to a panel. And I want to get right to the brilliant insights from our panelists, but I did want to give a few observations in taking a step back and looking at the data so that we can think through some of the implications of what we learned this year. So, you know, as Dave Foster sort of mentioned, oil and gas were sort of the big winners this year, of course, together with energy efficiency. And really, when we look at the transition that's often talked about in the energy economy, we can very clearly see this transition from coal to natural gas in the employment data. But also, just as a important note here, if you look at things sort of in a too aggregated fashion, you miss a lot of nuance, right? So this slide is intended to be somewhat of a caution as we look at the data, because if you just look at things from 10,000 feet, you might miss some nuance and therefore lose some of the important takeaways. So here we see, you know, this decline of all other generation and fuels when you combine all the other technologies, and if that's all you look at, you would miss these significant stories and growth in wind. You would miss some of the nuance in some of the other renewable technologies that are growing, and therefore we just wanted to make sure that there was a caution there on that, especially given volatility and how volatility works, and that any time you look at a one-year snapshot, you want to be very careful to not draw long-term trends. So if you look at solar for the last 2 years, you could say, my goodness, this looks like an industry in decline. It's declined by 3 or 4% per year the last 2 years. Of course, you would then be ignoring almost a decade of double-digit growth. Okay, so it's very important to take a 5 to 10-year look, which is part of the reason why the continuation of this report using a consistent methodology is so important, because it allows us to draw these longer-term conclusions by looking at trends. Here I also just wanted to point out a few important elements dealing with that question of transition. And so when you look at energy storage, this is really exciting. People have been talking about energy storage for a long time. We are actually now really starting to see some significant growth and opportunity, and not only the highest percentage gainer of any technology, but also the highest projected growth over time. Energy efficiency, again, as Dave mentioned, is a big growth opportunity. There's been lots of growth and there's lots of projected growth. And one of the areas that we really do need to focus on is what do these workforce challenges mean for energy efficiency? How do we deal with some of the issues around difficulty hiring and energy efficiency? Because if we don't find better ways of getting people off of the sidelines and into these positions, it will constrain growth. And given what employers would like to do based on their responses and what they're actually able to do, it is very likely that this difficulty hiring is in fact impacting the growth potential. Now here's a slide that I think is pretty important for us to get some context, and I'm just going to throw this out there because I think from looking at various studies we've done across the country, there are some important takeaways in this discussion about difficulty hiring. And Dave Foster noted how difficult it is for construction employers to find new talent, and also how important the construction sector is to the energy sector. This slide here, which is a little bit hard to see perhaps, but this is from a study that we did, a different study with a survey of 3,000 Generation Z and young millennials, so basically age 16 to 30, with most of the sample being between 16 and 24. And of all the industries that we tested in terms of career interest, we found that construction was the lowest. It was lower than retail, it was lower than hotels and lodging, it was lower than restaurants, it was much lower than healthcare, much lower than technology. And this is not a unique finding. This has been found by many other research organizations that young people have very low interest in entering careers in construction. Part of the challenge I think that we have with construction jobs, and I think that many in the workforce community, education community are contributing to this, is that it is very typical for very well-respected research organizations to publish reports that call construction jobs lower middle skilled because they don't require a 4-year college degree. These jobs are not low skill, and they're not middle skill. And as I was telling the folks on our weekly conference call, I can show you some screwdrivers that are all blackened from me trying to do electrical work without any skills in this space. It is not low skill, right? These are very highly skilled positions, and we have created a narrative that these jobs are lesser because they don't require a college degree, and that they are middle skill jobs, and they're not. So I think we need to really stop using that language. And we need to remember that because they are highly skilled positions, and if you look at apprenticeships for most of these skilled trades where there's difficulty hiring, it's a 2 to 5 year window before an individual who starts a training program can work unsupervised. Right? That's pretty significant, and by the way, also about how long it takes to get a college degree in this country. So we shouldn't be thinking of these things as easy on-ramp pathways that are somehow easier than a job that requires a 4-year degree. I want to focus on that apprenticeship model, and I know we're going to talk about that some in the panel, but apprenticeship models, when you talk to any employer, no matter how they feel about unions or apprenticeships or positions, when you ask them to describe the perfect training module that they would like to see implemented to then hire folks from, it's apprenticeship. So I think we do need to double our efforts in apprenticeship, and I know that there's been a lot of efforts over the years, particularly under the Obama administration, to increase those apprenticeship models. But this is a real challenge for us to face, and I think it's going to take a collective effort. The last thing that I want to note, again, on these short-term snapshots, but also on state policies, this is just solar jobs that you see here, and these are 4 essentially adjacent northeastern states. So you have Massachusetts is to the left, then you have New York as the grower there, the big grower, then you have Rhode Island and Vermont. And so all of these states on the right border Massachusetts. And what you see is, first note is that even in a region that's fairly similar, right, with lots of the same types of policies and politics and resources, you see really different numbers over time in terms of the growth and decline of solar industry over a year. So state policies clearly matter. We have the snapshot in the write-up from Alicia Barton in New York. NYSERDA is doing great things in New York and really promoting and moving the solar industry there. But I'll also note that the other 3 states here have seen some declines. Those are some very early adopters and some of the real market leaders per capita in the United States who saw this meteoric explosion of jobs, and then there's been some changing business models in terms of how sales are done or how other things are done, so that A, don't look at a 1-year snapshot and say that you have a trend, and B, don't think that the entire United States is going to be the same, because there are these real differences. So I think with that, it's probably a good time to transition to the panel. So I will ask our panelists to come up, and again, thank David Terry and Secretary Moniz and David Foster for their comments. And then we'll turn it over to our moderator, Pete Baird.